Hi everyone, and welcome to ISKL's 2021 TED Ed Student Talks event. My name is Thea, and I'm the president of this year's TED Ed Club. Along with our executive members, Anshika and Evie, our teacher supervisor, Ms. Tan, and our 13 dedicated club members, we've been working hard this past school year to put together this event. The theme is Ikigai, a Japanese term which means a reason for being, with the aim of inspiring others to stay resilient during these difficult times and to find what is truly important to them. With speeches on topics including genetic modification, open-mindedness, forced marriage, gender stereotypes, and more, our 13 high school speakers have it covered. We hope you enjoy this event.
For the past 6 months, our speakers have been working tirelessly to share their ideas. They've been meeting up every 2 weeks to brainstorm, write, and edit their speeches, the ones that we are lucky enough to hear today. Not only have they been working hard for themselves, but they've also spent extra time putting in the effort to listen and support their fellow speakers. We are lucky enough to have the opportunity to share our hard work with you today and are very grateful that you've taken the time out of your day to listen. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our first speaker. We will be listening to Erica H. and her speech, The Power of Financial Choice.
Some children dream of being doctors. Some dream of being teachers. Others still dream of being policemen, dancers, firefighters, chefs, or football players. And me, I've had only one dream since I was 5. When I first set my eyes on that glossy green piece of paper with the familiar musky odor of capitalism, I knew. I dreamed of being rich. The truth is, I don't even care much about fancy shoes or dresses or first-class airline tickets. I never even really minded not having caviar with my toast every morning. Maybe just on the weekends. Still, there was something special about that crinkly little piece of paper that I realized even as a little girl. It gave me options. I realized that when I had a $1 bill in my pocket, I could go to the store and buy a lollipop. But when I had a $10 bill, I could buy chips instead, or a can of soda, maybe even both. It gave me the power of choice, the first taste of autonomy I'd ever felt, and at the age of 10, I relished it. You see, there's a clear difference between choosing not to do something and not being able to do it. And in my eyes, money was the defining factor that provided me with this freedom of choice. My mother often tells me stories about our family before I was born. At the age of 30, my parents were living under extremely tough financial conditions after a failed business endeavor. My mother told me that the worst part wasn't the constant pressure to pay back loans or not living in a fancy house, but the lack of choice that came with being poor. It was not being able to choose to go out for lunch. It was not being able to choose to provide the best clothes, toys, and books for her child. From her story, I learned that autonomy, the option to make our own decision, is an important part of who we are as human beings. As people, we strive to have our freedom of choice, and money can give us that. Thus, as I grew older, my aspirations to infiltrate the bourgeoisie and become the next Korean Elon Musk grew bigger and bigger. Not everyone agreed with me, however. Out of the 10 kids in my class, I was apparently the only cold-blooded materialist, and also the only one who wanted a job that actually paid. And honestly, that kind of makes sense. Kid stories always feature the evil rich guys as the villain, when in reality, nasty people exist in all tax brackets. And so do the good people. The famous Russian-American writer and philosopher Ayn Rand once said, "Money is only a tool. It will take you wherever you wish, but it will never replace you as the driver." Maybe you'll choose to hurt others. But then again, maybe you'll do wonderful things. Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with his wife to help those in developing countries. According to their website, the foundation has granted $54.8 billion in grant payments as of 2019. Would Bill and Melinda have been able to make such a huge difference had they not had the money? Just as a $10 bill was a tool that gave young me the choice to buy a bag of chips, $50 billion were just a tool that gave them the choice to help others. Wealth provided them with the choice, and theirs was to help change the world. Freedom of choice and financial autonomy isn't always so full of grandeur, however. For a lot of us, it's as simple as choosing what to have, what to eat, what to do, and where to go. Imagine walking into a bakery. The delicious, sweet aroma of freshly baked pastry wafts into your nose. One display in particular catches your eye, a mouth-watering chocolate cake drizzled in butterscotch. Just as you're about to pick it up, your eyes wander to the price tag, $50. You check your wallet only to realize you have 3 $10 bills, a dime, a toothpick, and a photo of your mom. Disheartened, you step away from the extravagant display and pick up a loaf of bread. If you had had the choice to choose whatever you wanted, you would have chosen the $50 chocolate cake, but you didn't have the choice because you didn't have the money. In moments of such insufferable agony, it can get a little tough to stick to that old saying, money can't buy happiness, because we all know that cake is the physical embodiment of happiness. But for some people, a lack of financial choice can lead to bigger consequences than not getting a piece of cake. According to World Vision, 689 million people live in extreme poverty, surviving on less than $1.9 a day. For these millions of people, there is no choice but to eat 1 meal a day, or less. For these millions of people, money is the cause of their unhappiness. For these millions of people, all that preaching about how money can't win love or friendship or family doesn't mean anything, because why does it matter if money can't buy happiness when you need it to live? You see, money doesn't directly buy you happiness, but it does give you choice. And whether that choice is about starting a charity foundation, the type of job you take, or even just the type of cake you choose, this power of choice is ultimately a huge part of happiness. Now, that isn't to say you should mindlessly chase after a paycheck. There are other things that matter in life. The smell of home after a long day at work, the tinkling sound of a child's laughter, a warm hug from your spouse that somehow makes all the painful things in life better. None of these moments can be bought with money. But still, the next time you're tempted to say something like, money is the root of all evil, stop for a moment and think about how much power it has given you. From the moment you wake up and decide what to have for breakfast, remember that it's thanks to money that you have such a choice. And at the end of the day, when you return to the cozy warmth of your bed, remember that it's thanks to money that you have the choice to sleep in clean sheets. After all, every choice has a price, and no money would mean no choice. Spend wisely. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech, Erica. We now have Dia N with her speech, Seeing Outside Our Cave of Reality.
The importance of open-mindedness hit me when I was 12 years old, the age when the most difficult decision of my family summer vacation in New Jersey seemed to be choosing between Cocoa Puffs and Lucky Charms cereal every morning. And as I proceeded to choose Cocoa Puffs every single day, I would twirl the cereal around in my bowl and wonder, maybe the Earth was just a large Cocoa Puff in a giant's breakfast cereal. Or maybe the entire universe was just a tiny pixel in the video game of a big green alien with antennas. I once made the mistake of sharing these revolutionary ideas with my older cousins. They just laughed at me, dismissing me as nothing more than a small kid with a wild imagination. But I didn't understand their reaction. What they laughed at, I considered a serious possibility. What they called a wild imagination, I simply called open-mindedness. That day, I went down a rabbit hole of existential YouTube videos. I conceded that, yes, maybe my idea of the Earth being a pixel in an alien's video game might have been slightly far-fetched. But I realized that we don't know exactly how big the universe is. The 93 billion light years that we can see is just the observable universe. There could be light from galaxies that haven't reached us yet, or parts of the universe that are expanding faster than the speed of light. The universe could be 150 sextillion times larger than what we currently know. The point is we still don't know, which is why it is so important to keep an open mind. If we don't, we might never understand different perspectives of the world around us, just like in Plato's allegory of the cave. It depicts a story of 3 prisoners who are chained down to a cave. Essentially, everything they know about reality are based solely off flickering shadows on the cave wall. But when one prisoner is suddenly set free and sees the world outside the cave, she realized that the flickering shadows she saw were simply a reflection of the real world outside. Let us call this freed prisoner Anna. When Anna returned to the cave, no one believed her. Since it was outside their realm of imagination, they simply labeled her as crazy and delusional. But maybe Anna was onto something, and maybe the cave dwellers just needed to consider her perspective. So why didn't they? Maybe it's because our tendency to not be open-minded is actually innate. Canadian psychologist Saul Levine suggests that we're not born to be open-minded, and that we actually have an internal bias or desire towards strictly positive and agreeable information that fits our own perspective. It's hard to open ourselves up to a realm of new ideas. I'm no cave dweller, but when I entered high school, the prospect of public speaking seemed so daunting. As someone who always set high expectations for myself, I was scared to throw myself into situations where I could be judged, proven wrong, or disappoint myself. These self-imposed expectations became shackles that chained my mind down from exploring the world through other people's point of view. I unintentionally closed myself off, and I realized it is hard to be an Anna. But it's not impossible. Socrates tells us exactly how to have an open mind. True knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing. Though this seems counterintuitive, being open-minded comes from accepting that we all have limits to what we know. What's important is that we keep searching for new ideas, possibilities, and perspectives to understand the world better. But what did that mean for me, a high school student? How could I be open-minded and constantly search for different ways to see the ever-changing worldly shadows? For me, it meant that despite my inhibitions when entering high school, I threw myself into the world of forensics and debate. My initial fear of being wrong, judged, or disappointed in myself quickly faded when I was surrounded by ideas that challenged the way I originally thought. From global poverty, to philosophical debates, to even the longevity of turtles. I realized that I always held the key to release myself from these self-imposed shackles of closed-mindedness. Whether it be about the size of the universe or seeing outside our cave of reality, I've come to understand that I don't know a lot, and that's okay. But in this time of polarizing political climates, contentious economic issues, and the biggest humanitarian crisis in a century with COVID-19, keeping an open mind is what we need. To accept a vaccine, to manage overflowing healthcare systems, to lower unemployment rates, to find solutions, to save lives. On a societal level, we need to consider different perspectives for progress. But this progress derived from open-mindedness begins with the mindset of each individual person. To have informed opinions, educated discussions, and simply be more accepting of what other people have to say. In this sense, I like to think that my friends and I are all an Anna. Coming from an international school background, we enjoy discussing diverse perspectives on everything from economic responses to COVID-19, to my theories about the universe, and even perhaps the single most divisive issue that has plagued the Earth. Does pineapple belong on pizza? To which I must respond, no, it does not. But in the spirit of keeping an open mind, I came back to the question I asked myself years ago. Is the Earth just a large Cocoa Puff and a Giant's breakfast cereal? Maybe. Although this answer couldn't possibly satisfy my 12-year-old self, basking in the pride of her supposed insight, I can't accept or deny the possibility. I am no Socrates, nor do I have the philosophical wisdom of Plato, not even close. But I can try to feed my curiosity and see different situations through a kaleidoscope of perspectives. All it takes is an open mind. Thank you.
Time 6:45.
Thank you for your speech, Dia. We now have Kayla F. with her speech, Blackwashing Isn't a Thing.
As a person, I'd like to think I'm a lot of things. I'd like to think I'm funny and optimistic, and I'd really like to think that I'm smart. Though, that one is a little up for debate. The way I perceive myself is based on characteristics that I've developed throughout my life. Traits that, while I may not necessarily be proud of, are things that define me. When others look at me, their first judgments are probably going to be based on my looks, my clothes, my hair, my skin. And as much as we'd all like to say that race doesn't matter or that we don't see race, the truth is that it does. It really, really does. Your race, or the race people might perceive you to be, has great effects on how you're treated, what opportunities you're given, how you're treated in, say, the workplace, and so on and so forth. Now, personally, I'm half white and half black. But due to my skin, people often think I'm just black, albeit light-skinned. And if that's how people are going to perceive me, then might as well go with it, right? If you can't beat them, join them. So, for convenience sake, I'm just going to refer to myself as black for the remainder of this talk. And as a black individual, I notice a lot more things than people may give me credit for. I notice when you lighten the skin of that character for a reboot of a beloved childhood show. I notice when you change the hair texture of a black character to be less kinky and more presentable. And I notice when you choose that light-skinned actor to play a role over a dark-skinned one. Now, Hollywood and just society in general has a long history of erasing blackness throughout time, and this is what we call whitewashing. In a study on the top 100 grossing Hollywood films, it was found that 73% of the characters were white. And this statistic hasn't changed since 2007. The black community already has to deal with institutionalized and internalized racism, and having to see characters who are meant to represent them be washed away due to the white man's influence makes it all the more harder to be proud of our race and our heritage. So from that, we can gather that whitewashing exists, right? It might be something that's overlooked by a lot of people, especially non-black people, but it's there, and we notice. From this, I wanted to move on to the actual subject of my talk, which is this thing called blackwashing. And this is essentially where someone will take a character who is traditionally white and reimagine them as a black individual. As a little girl, all of my idols were white, and growing up surrounded by characters who didn't look like me had its negative effects. I hated my curly hair because I thought it looked ugly and unkempt, so I would always beg my mom to straighten it. I used to try and make homemade concoctions to bleach my skin in order to lighten it and appear more beautiful. Now, of course, there were black characters on TV, and there were even shows based around black lives, but these were few and far in between. Not to mention, shows featuring black characters often casted them as the white main protagonist's sidekick, or the sassy one, or the ghetto one, or the angry one. You see what I'm getting at here? They seemed to be there just to fit the diversity quota, as they were two-dimensional characters with no development outside of trying to help the main white protagonist progress along their own story arc. White protagonists could be wizards, or mermaids, or alien biologists, and no one batted an eye. But if your main character was black, you can bet that their whole gimmick was just being black, or racism. And yes, of course, it's important to illustrate the struggles that black folk go through, and an effective way to do that is through fictional media. But sometimes I just wanted to watch a show about a black person being silly, going on adventures, having fun with friends, without their race being questioned or thrown into the mix. What I'm trying to say is black characters shouldn't exist solely to be black. As I grew up and developed hobbies, I found myself drawn to art. Art is such a broad area of interest, and that's what makes it so beautiful. I found a whole world opened up to me, one where I could draw whatever I wanted, however I wanted. If I wanted to see my favorite characters look like me, why not just do it myself? I began reimagining these childhood characters as black, from cartoons to live action to comics. I had never felt that sort of freedom or comfort before, being able to see fictional people I had grown attached to look like me. It was magical. But as stories often go, it wasn't all rainbows and sunshine forever. Posting your art online is guaranteed to get hate, no doubt. But this was next level. People were throwing slurs, sending death threats, comparing my designs to monkeys. And yes, it hurt, of course. No one likes being ridiculed. But there was also the question of, why were they so mad? These were my versions of the designs of the characters. It's not like the actual show looked like this, so what was the point in getting so defensive? Then I came across the term blackwashing, and it was like, oh, so these white people were mad that I, a black person, was changing the race of their characters. Sounds a bit familiar, right? But in all seriousness, this element of race bending is where the similarities between blackwashing and whitewashing end. While whitewashing has historically been used as a way to erase and silence black voices, blackwashing is just bringing diversity to an otherwise white-dominated field. I don't see the problem with that, but obviously 15-year-old dude bros on the internet wouldn't agree. I'm black, so these issues are very personal to me, meaning that my viewpoint is skewed in favor of the side of the black community. But even being biased, I think it's important to point out these inequalities, as they're not things people first think about when the term racism comes up in topics of conversation. And I believe what gets people so uncomfortable about this idea of blackwashing is they believe we're trying to say the original designs weren't good, so we're making them better by turning them black. No, that's not what we're doing at all. These people who get mad at Halle Berry playing Ariel or Bridgerton having a substantial black cast are so wrapped up in themselves that they can't even see that we're not coming from a place of hatred towards the white community, but rather a place of desperation in trying to create means for us to feel seen and included in the media that we should have been a part of in the first place. Whitewashing has a history of hurting people of color. Blackwashing does not. So the next time you see someone interpreting a character in a way that isn't white, I implore you to, instead of asking why, remind yourself, why not? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech, Kayla. We now have Ikigai with his speech, which I'm pretty sure he'll pronounce better than I will. Oi, you think your grandfather's...
When it was time to come up with a speech this year, a myriad of ideas flooded my mind. Social injustices, politics, and even more. But no, let's not talk about those. There are countless experts out there who probably know more about these than I do, a high school student. So I asked myself, what is my area of expertise? What am I experiencing? Like, really? I'm going to tell you a series of short stories, and hopefully I'm going to offer you a lens to look at something you may, until now, find seemingly menial or insignificant. Oi! You think your grandfather's road, ah? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the correct response when a self-righteous driver maneuvers into your lane at a blazing speed of 20 kilometers an hour. Driving in Malaysia is an ordeal. And I remember this vividly. Right after handing me my license, the officer jokingly said, "Hey boy, don't drive in Malaysia." Well, I didn't understand until I encountered traffic jams. Traffic jams are despicable traps. Road closures, accidents, inconsiderate drivers, the honking. Oh my god. Everything is beyond your control. You are inevitably stuck in an unpleasant, stressful situation where you are absolutely helpless. Well, yeah, but it dawned on me that I'd spend the same amount of time regardless of how I feel. So essentially, it kind of would have been pointless to stress over it. Stay positive and utilize your time as best you can. For me, that means listening to a Freakonomics podcast, making cafe reservations, or relaxing to some Rachmaninoff for a few seconds before the guy behind me starts honking like there's no tomorrow. So in truth, traffic jams taught me that things can only get as stressful as you allow them to be. So make the most of your situation and just relax lah. So after you battle through the traffic jams, the next problem for you is GPS malfunction. Yeah, I highly suspect Malaysians' urban planners secretly aspire to be video game makers when they were young. Like seriously, they deliberately want to confuse you. One time, Google Maps indicated me to exit left. But within milliseconds, the road diverged into a million exits, all just inches apart. So I've learned the hard way to triple check exit numbers before committing. And road planners also frequently plan sneak attacks, ambushing you with a road split right after you exit, leaving you milliseconds to react. All my fellow drivers out there, you know your GPS does not respond in time. You know that. And you're on your own. It's 50-50. Pray and choose. Much like life, you do not always have the privilege to hesitate. The resources that you rely on so much may fail you in the most crucial of times. But fortunately, there are often no wrong choices. Only quicker ones or slower ones. But indecision is fatal. You would literally crash into the divider. So taking enough wrong turns and hopefully learning from them will help you avoid them in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, approach life with the courage to take wrong turns every now and then, as long as you have enough fuel to reroute. Now, potholes. I swear to God, the roadworks department is either understaffed or underpaid. And I'm sure all of you will agree, every trip on the road is exciting and dynamic. Think Mechanical Bull. After all, who likes boring rides? Life is like a Malaysian road, never smooth. Even when your destination is within sight, there will always be potholes along the way. Of course, yeah, you could speed through and probably lose your car insurance. Or you could slow down, maneuver past the obstacles, and hopefully remain in one piece. Rushing forwards can be tempting, but there is strength in staying patient and avoiding unnecessary risks. Finally, we arrive at the T-junction, the ultimate. T-junctions in Malaysia are notoriously difficult to cross because Malaysian drivers have absolutely zero sympathy. During my first ever T-junction approach, hundreds of motorists piled behind me and cursed my incompetence in every language they knew. So to help myself and potentially all the new drivers out there, I formulated a standard operating procedure, SOP, to help you out. Step 1, inch out bit by bit until everyone has no choice but to slow down and watch you pass. Step 2, if caught in an awkward situation, i.e. blocking the entire flow of traffic, remain calm, turn towards the halted traffic, crack an innocent smile, and raise your hand in apology. Trust me, the hand is very powerful. 3, at this point, hit the gas with utmost confidence, knowing that whatever profanity thrown at you has absolutely zero effect on your success. And the good thing is, you can apply this SOP to anything in life, for example, vying for a position. As harsh as it sounds, you shouldn't count on society, not now or ever. No one is going to advocate for you if you don't do so yourself. T-junctions have taught me to exert confidence and declare my intention. In many ways, driving quietly alludes to life. Who would have thought that something seemingly so mundane could change my entire perspective of life? So after all these painful experiences, I finally understood why the officer cautioned me against driving. It was arduous and it was, difficult, painful, any adjective you can think of. However, like life, it was also very eventful, enriching, exciting. And so I recalled the officer's advice, and I had many moments of reflection. If I had followed that advice, I would have gotten nowhere, literally and in life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ikigai, for that very interesting take. Up next, we have Daniel with his speech, Why School Should Start Later for Adolescents.
The effects of not getting enough sleep are fatal, and the harmful long-term consequences are simply too serious to ignore. Since most students are not receiving a sufficient amount of sleep, their performance in school and other activities are being affected negatively. In addition, their health and well-being are being put at risk. The problems these students face are so serious. Yet there are so simple solutions. Because of the amount of sleep deprivation students face, schools should shift their starting times so that they begin later in the morning and end later in the afternoon. Since most students are not receiving a sufficient amount of sleep, this negatively impacts their performance in school and other activities. In fact, teenagers between the age of 13 and 18 years old should get at least 8 to 10 hours of sleep. However, studies have shown that 68.4% of high school students reported sleeping for less than 7 hours a night. Think about it. Even if you are able to get 8 hours of sleep, that's just the bare minimum of what we teenagers should be receiving in our prime developmental years. If you get a C on a test or a C in a class, that's just the bare minimum of what it takes to pass that class. Would you be happy with that? Of course not. You'd want the B, you want the A. The same goes with sleep. You'd want 9, you want 10 hours of sleep. In my class, there's always at least one student in my first period class who's barely able to keep their eyes open, with their faces covered in their arms while lying on the desks. And when the teacher decides to ask them a question, they can't answer. Why is this? Why are the kids so tired? Why didn't the kids get enough sleep? You know, from my own perspective, being a student myself, I've been in this kid's position 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, if not more times. My morning usually starts off early, at 7 a.m. in the morning. Waking up feels like a grueling and painful task. It feels almost like a punishment to start off each morning. And when I reach my first class at 8 a.m., I'm barely able to keep my eyes open. My mind starts to wander off, telling my body that it's tired and that it wants to go back to sleep. And when I look at my classmates, they're all feeling the exact same way. They're tired. When we're doing classwork in class, it feels like you're just staring at a blank piece of paper the entirety of the time. I'm sure that teachers would be delighted if we were to shift starting times by an hour so that these students would be able to be more productive, more happy. You know, during my school's home-based learning system during this COVID-19 pandemic, it had class start times at 9 a.m. rather than its usual 8 a.m. start times. In contrast, student activity and productivity was at an all-time high. It feels like it's like two completely different people. One was more happy, energetic, and waking up felt normal, the way it should be. This is important because it sets the tone for how the day is going to go. You know, I hope that my school will make this 9 a.m. start times permanent when we go back to school in the future during the next school year. You can clearly see that the difference between a student who receives an adequate amount of sleep compared to a student who suffers from short sleep is like night and day. And the benefits clearly outweigh the costs, and we should still encourage change while we still can. Another argument in favor of shifting the start times is in hopes of improving these adolescents' health and well-being. According to the Centers Disease and Control Prevention, it stated that adolescents who do not get enough sleep are more likely to be overweight, not engage in daily physical activity, suffer from symptoms of depression. And research has shown that delaying school start times by an hour is an effective way in combating chronic sleep loss, which has been recognized as a public health issue and has a range of benefits towards students in terms of their physical and mental health, safety, and well-being. In addition, you would think that schools would take this data that they have into consideration to pushing these start times by an hour, because it definitely shows how short sleep negatively impacts these students' health and well-being. In a recent report as well, crash rates decreased by 16.5% when delaying school start times. So earlier school start times also have an increase in vehicle accidents. A solution as simple as shifting these start times could improve and impact and completely change the lifestyle of millions of students all around the world. But why, some say, should we delay the start times? They may as well ask, why should we sleep? Why should we be happy? Many critics argue that delaying school start times by an hour just encourages students to stay up even later. Although this is a valid point, according to Amanda Macmillan, teenagers who begin to go through puberty start to produce melatonin, making it difficult for them to sleep before 11 p.m. And even if a student manages to sleep at 11 p.m., they would need to sleep until 7:30 a.m. or later in order to obtain a sufficient amount of sleep. In fact, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine urges that the national standard of middle and high school start times at 8:30 a.m. or later. That being said, most schools still start at or before 8 a.m. Shifting the start times has no significant consequences. Instead, such a simple solution will increase these students' proactiveness and increase the readiness to learn. When one considers the negative health risks, the negative performance in schools, and negative performance in sports, it's clear that without a shadow of a doubt, shifting the start time is the right move. There'll be plenty of nights when teens' adult lives will be to work long hours, stay up late, and not get enough sleep. However, if we don't take the steps right now to preserve the well-being of our future today, your future, your kids' future, and your grandchildren's future might be negatively impacted. Together, we must solve this epidemic of sleep deprivation. However, it's our responsibility to try and invoke change. But we can only try so much until we can only finally hope that schools will finally listen and finally shift their starting times. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for your speech. That is definitely something to think about. Next, we have Ria with her speech, Wealth Disparity, What We Don't See.
Wealth disparity, what we don't see. Look at the device you're using to watch this. Think about a time you've traveled by plane, or even just look at the size of your house. These things have unimaginable consequences, but very likely not for you. During one of my classes, as we looked at our carbon footprints, most of our lives are unsustainable and continue to drain the earth. Our traveling by plane, our big houses, our carbon footprints will eventually affect the more vulnerable, the people facing poverty, the people suffering from extreme wealth disparity. This was when it hit me that the things we love cause harm to others without our knowledge nor our agency. We just ruin the lives of the young and poor to get ahead. The wealth disparity in our world is unthinkable as the rich get richer, but the poor get poorer. As teenagers, we learn about this at school every year. We learn about the issue, we learn of its importance, yet we don't do anything. When it comes to the topic of wealth disparity, most of us immediately agree that it is an issue, but it's inevitable. Although because of our capitalistic societies, it is inevitable to have employers make more than employees, it becomes a serious issue when it's polarizing and unsustainable for humanity, where someone is earning $10,000 a day and someone is earning $10 a day. The head of climate policy at PAWesome, an organization hoping to end the issues which cause poverty, Tim Gore, recently said, "The overconsumption of a wealthy minority is fueling the climate crisis. Yet it is poor communities and young people who are paying the price. This is the reason wealth disparity endures. We just ruin the lives of the young and poor to get ahead. We don't try to reduce the disparity. We don't reduce our excessive use of items. We don't even the playing field. As this economic privilege to the rich continues, poor people may remain uneducated and have to get jobs that pay lower than the minimum wage. This is what the poverty cycle is. It starts with someone in poverty having a low salary, which causes low savings and low investment options, which causes a low education for them and future generations, which leads to a job with low salary. Hence, the cycle continues. One of our largest unseen consequences is supporting unsustainable companies paying lower than the minimum wage. In the United States alone, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor, as of 2017, about 1.3 million people were paid below the hourly minimum wage of $7.25. This is something we don't realize. And then companies begin to believe it is okay to pay lower than the minimum wage. However, we don't realize it and continue to support these companies. The United Nations suggests that even just promoting safer working environments and the safety of these workers is helpful, because this is what causes wealth disparity to become inhumane. This inhumanity continues because of unfair equality and economic unfairness. Unfair equality is where things are equal, but they're unfair. This could be seen as a scientist who discovers the cure for cancer to be paid the same amount as someone who drives a taxi. It is equal, but it's unfair. A lot of this comes back to the idea of successful business owners who should get paid, however, create more jobs and give back sustainably by creating sustainable companies. This will help people who couldn't get an education to provide for their families and get their children an education and begin to end the poverty cycle. When it comes to helping solve issues like this, we can come up with solutions. However, it is imperative to follow the solutions. We need to encourage governments to create progressive taxes, which are having a set amount of tax for a certain amount of money and paying more tax on the remnant. For example, if you earned anything below $1,000, you may have to pay 10% tax. And if someone else earned $5,000, they paid that 10% tax on the first $1,000 and more tax on the remaining $4,000. In the end, they'd still have more money, but governments would have more tax money. This tax money could change the lives of people in poverty through improving healthcare, education, and basic necessities. These taxes could change the lives of these people in poverty while still maintaining that high quality of life of the rich. These taxes work in ways to essentially reverse some of our unseen consequences, as the taxes you'd pay would directly help people harmed by wealth disparity. Progressive taxes may seem like things you can't help with, but even promoting education will help wealth disparity because, as the United Nations suggests, providing the youth with better education and basic safety services will help start to even the playing field and prevent the poverty cycle. This could be done by donating to charities or by even raising awareness of these charities. We know extreme wealth disparity exists, but we have to do something about it. The number of people harmed by wealth disparity is unacceptable. It is inhumane. The privileges we have just support wealth disparity and myriad unseen consequences. And there are not many ways to reduce this without looking at the big picture. However, we are obligated to. The next time you have a class about the inequality in our world or buy a new ISKL, don't just think about the consequences of your actions on the young and poor of our society. Change something about what you do. Don't let another kid sit through class realizing that we ignore people's lives and are able to do so just because we have some economic privilege.
Thank you, Ria, for that thought-provoking speech. Next up, we have Anshika with her speech, Forced Marriage, a Self-Propagating Chain.
I've always been a fan of weddings, be it in the Western format, blushing brides adorned with white veils, or the jubilant Hindu festivities, a myriad of extravagant jewelry, reds and jewel tones, or perhaps even a romantically secretive elopement. More than the festivities, however, I have longed for the promise of a good, stable marriage. Guaranteed, unvarying companionship for life, a second half to share the world with. The issue I take isn't with the basis of marriage in and of itself, but rather the means by which marriage has, through history, perpetuated itself as a sort of figurative leash. Collar around neck, suffocating, choking coercion, prodding and pulling young people and women into compliance. Though both genders are susceptible to the pressure, women are clearly far more so, and systemically entrapped under the lidless eye of a society constantly scrutinizing, surveying, and manipulating. Marriage has been a guarantee of stability, of protection, of familial longevity, and legacy, through the production of sons, of course. The only means of social mobility for a family bearing home to daughters was hypergamy. Women were primed, powdered, plucked, and cooked to perfection. You notice how you're always the one pressured into completing household chores and work, forced to stay in, locked away under your parents' seal of protection, while your brothers skate away free and unbridled. In a period of civilization in which women had little scope to gain meaningful employment or opportunities for a purpose beyond bearing children, marriage was not just a last resort, it was the only resort. Then why today, in an era of accelerating women's empowerment and entrance into the labor force, does the practice still remain such an unsightly reality for so many? Though we say society has progressed in some manners, with the more Western and developed East Asian nations largely granting women the right to earn money independently, the cultural shadows of the malevolent practice of forced marriage remain unsubsiding to this day. particularly in Asian nations, and in my case, India. I don't like perpetuating stereotypes or tropes about my already globally degraded home nation, but the reality is that a large portion of India, even Asia as an entirety, still resorts to this practice, not so much as a means of mutual support, but rather a single-sided coercion into deference. I like to differentiate between arranged marriage and forced marriage. Though many, particularly from the Western audience, might lump the two under a singular umbrella, the fact of the matter is that each term follows its namesake definition. Arranged marriages are often little more than mere setups between families, prone to the consent of the prospective bride or groom, albeit with some parental pressure. As an illustration, my own parents had an arranged marriage. Remember, not a forced marriage. Their relationship exemplifies to me everything a marriage should be: mutually supportive, stable, generally and consistently peaceful. What the majority of people confuse this with are forced marriages, in which no input is taken, particularly from the bride's side, or considered, and often used as a means to settle familial disputes, promises to relinquish the painful burdens of having a daughter, or to somehow punish her for an eternity and ever after. A human transaction, father to husband, the grips of one family into another which sees you as little more than a housemaid and commodity, incited and completed in means as sterile as a bank transfer. There we have an exemplification. Human beings have an innate tendency to prolong the sources of our resentment. In the unfortunate circumstance that you are born to a mother who has faced such pains and lives with a marriage as excruciating and gut-wrenching as poison, it is likely that you will be forced and guilted into the same custom, with little defense. And thus the cycle continues, unyielding. There we have an exemplification of what perpetuates marriage as a cornerstone: soul-sucking and agonizing. It is not so much an ambiguous criminal society perpetuating such customs, but rather family, those who are supposed to be the greatest well-wishers for young women. What further toxifies forced marriage is the means by which it characterizes women as burdens, or demeans a woman's value based on superficial metrics. You've probably heard of dowry, which the Merriam-Webster dictionary denotes as money, goods, or estate that a woman brings to her husband in marriage. Seems somewhat innocuous, but to me, dowry really exemplifies the way in which young girls are commodified, almost auctioned. My mother was the fairest, prettiest young girl in her rural Indian village, and thus was able to marry up the social ladder. Any girl who was darker skinned, older, not conventionally attractive, or not a virgin would likely be confined to her low socioeconomic status. No scope or support for educational or vocational advancement. Thus, society unconsciously develops an appearance-based metric by which to measure women. We can see this literally everywhere in our world. How often do you see unattractive female actresses gracing movie screens? Hollywood to Bollywood. According to the CBS, in a survey of almost 1,000 young heterosexual people exposed to video imagery of the opposite sex, the majority of men noted a woman's look over her perceived intelligence and confidence, while women demonstrated the opposite trend. A striking yet crystal clear reflection of these appearance-based metrics for women. To tell you the truth, there is little I can personally suggest in the way of a solution. The reality is that a practice as deep-rooted and insidious as forced or coerced marriage must be nullified at its link, before it can transfer into the next generation of women and take root once again, grueling and toxic. I'm privileged enough that my immediate family and parents put absolutely zero pressure on me to marry. I don't think they have even mentioned my potential marriage to me at all. My parents cut the preceding chain of marital dependence and bestowed upon me, a young girl, every opportunity I could ever desire or make practical use of to succeed on my own terms. That brings me to another point. Systemic economic development and opportunity are keystone in securing the scope of women's detachment from marriage as a means to establish economic security. According to the London School of Economics, increases in female employment and falling fertility rates have often been linked to rising female wages. What does this portray? Clear and unriddled evidence that women's reliance on marriage and childbearing as a means to guarantee a livelihood falls with increased economic stability, and thus nullifying this forced and depraved custom of forced marriage. Again, I'd like to reiterate that I fully support the basis of marriage as a concept, and I even want that for myself one day in the future. However, this should be a free choice and not be seen as a last-ditch attempt to rid oneself of the burden of a daughter before she reaches her biological deadline. In the future, I'd like to see myself in a partnership of mutual economic stability and independence, contribution of unwavering and equal respect, with the freedom to leave if need be. Not a single-sided practice, insidious, superficial, derided, breaking the figurative legs of half a society and forcing them into a subordinate position of dependence and deference. Thank you.
Thank you, Anshika, for your speech. Next up, we have Devina with her speech, Beyond Pink and Blue, Gender Stereotyping in Advertisements.
A few months ago, as part of our unit in class, my teacher pulled out this Van Heusen ad from the 1950s. This ad is offensive to most women with the way that it shows them as objects that exist solely for the purpose of pleasing men, which marginalizes and sexualizes them. This got me thinking, do ads still adhere to gender roles and stereotypes to fulfill its purpose? Is it still tolerated in 2021? The Advertising Standards Authority found that harmful gender stereotypes can contribute to how people see themselves and their role in society, therefore restricting their choices and aspirations. This not only affects themselves, but society as a whole, because as it contributes to inequality within the society, it also has social and economical implications. For example, if through an ad, women believe that they are not good drivers, they may not buy cars, and that could negatively impact the economy. Moreover, these gender stereotypes are outdated and would have truly existed in society in the 1950s, like in the ad shown earlier. In fact, 85% of women say that the film and advertising industries do a poor job of representing real women and what it's like to be a woman in today's day, as reported by Kantar, a market research company. For instance, the Van Heusen ad shown earlier presents a man being treated like a king in a tropical paradise, which seems to be what the advertisement is trying to sell through their shirt. The ad's catchphrase is "a feast for the eyes," which can be interpreted in several ways, such as "wearing the shirt will make you look very handsome," or "the women dancing are very attractive. A feast for the eyes is seen through the facial expressions of the man." A feast for the eyes itself is a very problematic phrase, especially when used to describe women, as it caters to a heterosexual masculine gaze by depicting women as objects meant for a man's pleasure. Nevertheless, we must also acknowledge that these ads were created in the 1950s, and these kind of gender-conforming roles are not used to advertising products and services anymore. But is that entirely true? No. Even today, gender stereotyping in advertising still exists despite the change in roles of men and women over the years. Let's take a look at this advertisement campaign of Patek Philippe, a luxury watch brand from 2018. Here are a mother and daughter sitting next to each other, looking very beautiful. But what is problematic about this? Well, if you look at a different ad from the same campaign targeting the male audience, you may be able to spot the gender stereotyping. The stereotyping is visible in both ads, as the females are shown in roles of beauty, whereas the males are shown in roles of the breadwinner. The ad on the left has an obvious, delicate, feminine energy to it, with the color scheme in golden, royal colors, whereas the ad on the right has a more masculine energy to it, as the color scheme is an extreme black and white. However, the effective portrayal of gender roles in advertisements is doing the opposite of its purpose. According to brands, ads that are more equitable in gender portrayal or are slightly female skewed outperform brands that stick to outdated stereotypes by $1 billion. In a nutshell, using gender stereotypes in ads not only affects the consumers, but it also results in a financial loss for the brand. This may have worked in the past, but it certainly isn't working in the present anymore. This is a sign in the shift of society's perception of women and men, and it shows that we are progressing in the right direction. Even though gender roles today continue to be used by the advertising industry, governments and consumers all over the world are striving for a change. In particular, as reported from Vox News, the UK government has declared a ruling where marketers will be prohibited from portraying harmful stereotypes in advertisements which can depict women in negative ways, where society may ultimately view these stereotypes as limits to the capabilities of women and restrict them from having the opportunity to do what they want. For example, expecting women to take care of their families and become a full-time mom. In addition, countries such as Belgium, France, and Norway also have implemented regulations around gender stereotypes in advertisements. Through the power of social media, consumers and digital users are also taking matters into their own hands, where they are able to respond back to such ads. Multiple ads over the past few years have received widespread backlash on social media when the users deem the ads offensive. Social media has also brought movements that celebrate different body types, challenge conventional gender roles, and spread a message of inclusivity that has stuck with a huge percentage of consumers. Additionally, the UK government also allows citizens to report ads that do not follow the new standards set by ASA. Not to mention, Marketing Week, a marketing news source, reported that in 2017, several advertisers themselves created the Unstereotype Alliance, initiated by Unilever, to end gender stereotyping in ads. The patriarchal society that existed in previous decades, where women were often stripped of their own voice, reduced them to nothing but objects like the ad from the 50s. Slowly, women started speaking out, and this created a blur between men and women when women were provided with more equal opportunities. The gender stereotyping in ads has certainly decreased over the years, but it still exists in subtle forms which continues to reinstate these roles into society. This is a step in the right direction, but it is still somewhat surface level, as more needs to be done, as often brands don't realize the cultural impact their ads can make on society. To counter this, several initiatives have already been taken, as mentioned before, but more and more brands and governments need to take actions against this by raising awareness and by regulating the extent to which gender stereotypes can be represented through advertisements. Thank you.
We move on to our next speaker, Elizabeth Choi, with a speech entitled Ignorance and Homophobia, a Tough Line to Walk.
Hate is ignorance. When you don't know what you're saying, when you don't know why you're saying it. Oxford defines gay as an adjective commonly used for homosexual among several other older definitions that are not used in today's language. It defines homophobia as dislike or prejudice against gay people, and it defines prejudice as a preconceived opinion not based on any reason or actual experience. Yet can we still call it homophobia when the offender has no idea of the meaning of the words they use? One day, my younger brother came home from school and told me that one of his friends had said, "That's so gay." My brother and all of his friends at the time didn't do anything. I assumed it because they didn't know what to do, or if even "that's so gay" was wrong to say. When my brother told me this story, I immediately disliked his friend. I didn't even know his name. Later, I learned that this friend didn't even know what gay meant. He just heard someone older, someone he looked up to say it, so he did. But when I had this conversation with my little brother, I did not know that. I thought my brother's friend was homophobic, an 8-year-old homophobe. Ignorance can so easily present itself as homophobia, and with how widespread it is, it becomes a barrier seemingly impossible to topple. What makes this worse is that maybe at first my brother's friend didn't have any prejudice, but if anyone continuously uses homophobic slurs or LGBTQ+ terms as slurs, it becomes more than a habit. It transforms into discrimination. Our social media can promote discriminatory language and miscommunication. According to an article by Natalie Hope McDonald, there are 2.4 million tweets using gay slurs. In our world, there is a group of people that have created 2.4 million homophobic tweets. There is so much misinformation in our media that it is difficult to pick out actual information unless you know what you are looking for. For example, when people use sarcasm, but it is not interpreted that way, and people's feelings get hurt. Maybe that was what happened with my younger brother's friend. But it begs the question, is homophobia that stems from ignorance really homophobia, or just more ignorance? I could go on for hours and hours on this topic. There are simply so many different sides to delve into. But the fact is, it doesn't matter. Whether it is homophobia or ignorance, using homophobic slurs is harmful. It hurts people. What we call it will not change that fact. The core of our society can be prejudice. Our language, media, and interactions are so often shaped by the heterosexual ideal. Centuries of ignorance have built up through no fault of any one person or group, and it has conditioned our society to be discriminatory. Heteronormativity marginalizes the LGBTQ+ community. It may not stem from any true dislike or prejudice, but again, it hurts people and it prevents us from celebrating our diversity. So how do we make ourselves and our community more inclusive to the LGBTQ+ community? There isn't a gay class where you can learn everything about gay people, and if there were, it probably wouldn't be allowed in many schools. Nobody can go home and fix the entirety of homophobia in one night. It just doesn't work that way. A large group of people can't fix homophobia. It's so rooted in our societies that there simply isn't an easy way to combat it all at once. We can try to take it in slow, manageable chunks. For example, we could call other people out and explain why what they said was wrong. It is not easy to put yourself on the spot and to call someone out. If it were, then there would be a lot less hate all around. To stop something as institutionalized and rooted in our societies will require patience, empathy, and time. The very first step in something as institutionalized and widespread as homophobia is to fix it within ourselves and listen when others correct us for inappropriate comments. However, we just established that everyone is ignorant in one way or another, and we can never truly be free of ignorance. We have to be patient with ourselves. And when we don't understand something, or when people don't understand us, don't we ask questions at school? Aren't we implored to be curious? Does one truly understand everything? Calling people out is accusatory, and the language we use is aggressive, not to mention the inherent stubbornness of human beings. We jump to conclusions and take things the wrong way. Admitting you've made a mistake is difficult. Changing the way you think is hard. Nobody likes to be called homophobic. It sounds like you're afraid of something. It is literally an adjective that calls you a hateful person. That is why empathy is key when it comes to combating homophobia and ignorance. We are not perfect and we make mistakes because we are human. Reminding ourselves about that and when we correct people and when people correct us is vital. The day that my younger brother came home and told me that one of his friends had said "that's so gay," he asked me why it was wrong to say gay. Why was his friend in the wrong when gay can mean happy? So I told my brother of 8 years at the time that gay is not a bad word. Using gay as a bad word is what makes the phrase "that's so gay" wrong to say. When the actual definition of what you are saying does not equate to whether it is right or wrong is confusing. Understanding that is where everyone would benefit. Mistakes can be made, but they are just that, mistakes. Things that stem from ignorance, things that we do not wish nor want to repeat, things that we regret. It is a slow process that will take decades, maybe even longer, to reach a point in our society where it isn't taboo to call someone out. Until then, it's important to retain patience and empathy when you do talk to people, so that you don't end up calling an 8-year-old a homophobe.
Thank you very much. We now move on to our next speaker, Evie B., with her speech entitled, "Will History Repeat Itself Forever?"
History repeats itself is one of the most depressing phrases I know. And I know what you must be thinking, and that it sounds a little bit strange. To many people, it's just something you say that when your friend makes the same mistake over and over. It's something trivial and unimportant. It's just a fact of life. And there it is. That's why that phrase is so depressing. It's so common that we cannot stop making the same mistakes that we use that expression in our everyday language. The acceptance we show to that phrase is an example how we, as a society, have a fixed mindset about our own growth. When I still took a history class, I learned that we must study our mistakes and improve upon them. We have to seek out the patterns in our history and never repeat our errors. And yet, despite this message of hope and change, we are inevitably still taught that history repeats itself. Due to our recent technological progression, it seems like this isn't the case anymore. For example, recently, a new type of ground travel was developed, the Hyperloop. According to Business Insider, this train goes 700 miles per hour and can take us from Los Angeles to San Francisco in 45 minutes. If you're more into sci-fi movies like Back to the Future, according to BBC, the first flying car by volocopter will be used as a taxi in the near future. So yes, we are developing, but only technologically. We as a society are not. It only takes seconds to look around us and see the repeated injustices occurring in the world today. We are not only stuck in our cycles of oppression, but we accept it as a fact of life. Just look at the rise of hate crimes against African American communities because we are still not used to racial diversity. Also look at the rise of hate crimes against Asian communities because of unfounded claims as to who's to blame for the pandemic. This seems to be a repeat of the time that Asian communities were oppressed in the United States by not being allowed to immigrate unless they were exceptional by American standards, or when slavery was still legal in the United States. We've seen this behavior throughout history, with prejudices against people of different backgrounds being used as excuses for discrimination. We've had wars fought over our hatred, and we continuously excuse it as a fluke of society. But it seems to be in our DNA itself. According to social identity theory, we perceive ourselves based on the groups we associate with. We not only praise our groups and make them seem better, we also inherently discriminate against people who aren't part of our own group. If this theory is correct for even most people, it seems that we can't fight against our nature. even if it is the cause for so much pain in our history. But I'm not here to tell you that change is impossible. I'm actually here to tell you that it is. We might have it ingrained in our minds that we cannot change as a society and that we are bound to our fate, but this is just not true. I'm here to tell you that we've already laid the groundwork for us to live together in peace, and rather than in the same gridlock of mistakes we keep making. Firstly, we live in the age of information. We have a wealth of data available at the click of a finger with which we can spread our ideas and lives for the world to see. This has created a community of acceptance where we don't tolerate the pattern of hatred and undiplomatic actions anymore, but instead group towards working together. For example, the Black Lives Matter protests were better understood by unaffected communities due to the exposure that social media granted it. It makes it more of a collectivist movement. In a BBC article, Ambassador Andrew Young talks about the movement, saying, "I don't know who the leaders are. In fact, I don't know that they even have leaders. I think it's perhaps a spiritual, emotional movement created by implicit evils in our society that we have not been willing to face. This ideology no longer needs one main voice. No, it has millions of people calling for justice. There is no more space for hatred when it is filled up with the voices of the future. Secondly, we are globalizing at a rapid pace. It's rarer to hear of someone who has stayed in their country for their entire lives than of someone who has at least traveled outside once. Every day, more and more people move countries, spreading their perspectives around the world. With every new person traveling somewhere new, there are more opportunities to learn about each other and gain acceptance. As an international school student myself, I can attest to the fact that without my experiences, I would have almost certainly not been made aware of our world as aware of our world as I am now. I believe that because of this exposure to new people that I have been granted. Thirdly, we are finally arriving to a period of great peace. While there are still civil wars, wars between countries have subsided. According to Kurzgesagt, an informative research channel, we found it more beneficial to be civil with our neighbors than to fight. We used to claim territories to gain materials, but today trade deals do that work for us. We have international courts, have set most of our borders, and would rather work diplomatically than in anger. While the reasons for peace here are economic, it is beneficial towards all of us because it is allowing us to break a pattern of undiplomatic actions and lean towards working together. So, how do we stop history from repeating itself? It's quite simple. We keep in contact. We talk to people who hail from different backgrounds, listen to their stories, and give them an open mind. If we continue down the path we are at today and accelerate our efforts, we could eradicate the hatred we are producing currently. We could live together in peace. Yes, we are creatures of habit. We are bound by our DNA to favor people like ourselves. But since when have we been stopped by obstacles as simple as that? We have learned to travel the oceans, fly in the sky, and even go to the moon. So we won't stop at something as simple as our instincts. If we have a goal in mind, we can achieve it, as long as we believe we can.
Thank you for your invigorating speech, Evie. We now move on to our next speech by Michael X, entitled How GM Technologies Can Change Us Forever.
Think for a moment. Have you ever thought about what if a fruit was more unique? What if there was more of it? For example, apples wouldn't occur. Wouldn't that be a good idea? These questions were definitely part of my childhood and may be present in yours. I remember my mom told me stories about her childhood in undeveloped China and how lack of food was a serious issue there. She had to sacrifice a lot of what she had per day to feed her brother. These stories were touching to me. And since right now we live in a developed world where food is at our fingertips every day, but the truth is, hunger is still an issue in developing regions. We want bigger fruits and attributes that make the fruit better, yet reality is crushing. But with the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, we can make our dreams come true with CRISPR technology and genetic engineering. Genetic engineering works by altering the DNA of an organism, aka the thing that causes the characteristics to show up. With a change of DNA, we can, for example, make chickens grow more legs or make something grow an extra arm. Now, we as humans could use this to our advantage. Think about it. Larger crop yields to feed more people. This is a wonderful idea, and that would make our lives more convenient than ever and have access to more abundant foods. However, many people don't like the idea of GMOs, genetically modified organisms. They argue that it is not natural and based on their instincts and their thoughts on changing the organism. They disagree with the technology. They argue that it is not good. But in fact, genetic engineering is based on the concept of selective breeding, which we have been doing for millions of years. Selective breeding is basically breeding organisms with characteristics we like to try for a better result. And guess what? What fundamentally makes those characteristics show up? That's right, you guessed it, DNA. So what we are doing with selective breeding fundamentally is taking DNA we like and mixing it with other DNA to try for a chance at getting an improvement. How is this different from genetic engineering? We now, with the aid of Fourth Industrial Revolution technology, can precisely cut and change DNA. It takes less time and has more precision than our methods of selective breeding. So why would there be so much distrust in this technology? Throughout genetic engineering tests, food have been tested for any side effects, and just like the favor-saver tomato and other herbicide-resistant crops that we use today, and they have been tested and selected for any side effects before they were put on the market. This further makes concerns seem stubborn and illogical. Why wouldn't we take an alternative that is way better for us? Another aspect of this technology is CRISPR. It is used for designing babies and human engineering. In this field of research, scientists have successfully used CRISPR to edit genes for animals which have been proven to be faster and more precise than our old technologies. This would lead to designer babies being born, and research is currently ongoing. Because of this innovation we found in nature, we can help to eradicate many cancers and to help boost immunity in children, leading to a lot less suffering. On the other hand, people think it is immoral to engineer a kid. But think about it. Is it better for them to be exposed to the dangerous diseases and cancers when we have the technology to eradicate them? It's just like a vaccine for cancer and hereditary diseases. Do you personally think it is better for us not to prevent that? Therefore, we should be looking forward to this technology to change our lives for the better. And though there are concerns, they are largely based on moral reasons instead of fact. The fact is, we can achieve a better future using this technology. And think about all the people we would save if we had more crops because of genetic engineering. They won't be hungry like my mother when she was young. And think about the children, about how they would be cancer-free and how much more people would be saved because of this. And think about the benefits that brings to the table. So, let's embrace this change instead of hating it. And we can have a better future for our children and our generations after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your insightful speech. We will now be moving on to our second to last speaker, Yogita, with her speech entitled, Yes, My Accent is Showing. I'm going to start off with an extract from the poem Accents by Denise Fromm. My mother's tongue is a telegram from her mother, decorated with the coquilles of El Campo, so even when her lips can barely stretch themselves around English, her accent is a stubborn compass always pointing her towards home. I knew of a girl who was ashamed of her mother tongue. She thought it was useless learning as it will only leave her with an accent. Growing up, she only spoke in English, only watched English films, and only listened to English songs. For the longest time, she believed that speaking English like a native speaker was the only way to be considered proficient, and smart even. And I don't blame her for thinking so. She, like most people, was led to believe so. Sometimes, though, she comes across words that don't sound as they seem, to her at least. Hyperbole? And she's quick to be laughed at by her classmates, who go on to say, "How can you not know that?" or "Your accent is showing." And here's when the problem arises, when proficiency becomes a superiority complex. It's easy to look around you and see many people who resemble the classmates of the girl. People who think that the ability to speak flawless English is a measure of intelligence that sets you a class above. Well, they're not entirely wrong, are they? English, as we know, is a global language, a lingua franca that connects us all and is a common means of communication by people of different cultures, even those whose first language is not English. Thanks to colonization and globalization, English has pertained in many post-colonial countries and is the most preferred language of communication. Now, this isn't the problem. Learning language is a good thing, especially a language like English that is spoken by so many people across the world. It opens up new opportunities and allows communication to a wider group of people. And being proficient in it, to a certain extent, is a measure of intelligence. Knowing when to use the right tense and articulate vocabulary requires a lot of skills and work. But to sound like a native speaker should not be the aim of learning language, to me at least. The girl that I knew, her classmates didn't understand the fear and embarrassment she felt when she mispronounced a word in class. They did not see the girl's fear as she wondered if her written piece sounded intellectual enough compared to her peers. They don't know how her thoughts always sound better in her head, but tumble awkwardly as she voices out. But I do, for I am her. Language is essentially a means of human communication. And well, one would think that that's all there is to it. But what if I told you knowing how to speak in a particular language, in a particular way, decides your status in society? What if it reflects your value as a person? Well, this may sound like a stretch, but it is the reality for many non-native English speakers. Recently, a video of a science teacher teaching in English on national television became a talking point amongst Malaysians. Some shamed the teacher for her broken and accented English, to the point of questioning her professionalism as a teacher. To which the teacher responded by accepting her mistakes and clarifying her determination to improve her pronunciation. But for me, it was heartwarming to see many Malaysians defend the teacher in regards to her accent, stating that, well, as long as the message is understandable, the accent is not a problem. And I agree with them. It made me realize how sometimes the talent and skills of a person takes a back seat, and what remains forefront is their ability to speak in flawless English. That made me wonder if, the very language that was meant to unite people now creates a rift between people. I was raised trilingual, skilled in Tamil, English, and Bahasa Malaysia. But I was always led to believe that English is the better language among the languages that I know. And so throughout my years of studying English, I learned how to sound the most American I could. And in doing so, neglected my first language, as I thought, well, it's not important. And hearing people say, "Oh, hello, your English sounds American na," it used to make me grin. But now it no longer matters to me if I sound American when speaking English. Mispronouncing a word no longer makes me squirm, nor does having my accent show. And sometimes it baffles me how some accents are highly regarded than others. Speak in a British accent and you will most likely receive a compliment on it, even if sometimes people may not understand what you're saying. Speak in an Indian accent, and on top of having to repeat yourself, you will most likely become a laughingstock. And so, why the double standards? A post-colonial effect? Maybe. Interestingly though, according to Ethnologue's 21st edition, there are 378 million native English speakers and 743 million non-native English speakers who speak English as an additional language. Now, these numbers suggest that an American or British accent may not be the most commonly spoken English accent after all. And that's a great reason to start taking pride in accented English. I choose to believe that every one of us approaches the language in our own unique ways. And there's no need to be ashamed of this. Don't shy away from your accent when you're called out for it. Speak it up proudly. Take pride in your native language. Speak it unapologetically. The beauty of languages lies in its interconnectedness with one another. and so does our ability to speak these languages. So stop accent shaming. And as I speak right now, I may have mispronounced a few words, may have let my accent slip, but if you've understood what I've said so far, then I believe that that's all that matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now for our final speaker in this event tonight, we'll be moving on to speaker Rebecca Flores with her speech entitled Money Through the Eyes of a Child.
I have lived in 3 different countries, China, Belgium, and Malaysia. In each of these countries, I've witnessed different cultures, economies, and befriended people from different classes. And now at 15, I've started thinking a lot about money and the way we grow up becoming not only physically, but mentally dependent on it. I'd like to start by presenting a quote by Oscar Wilde, which inspired me to do this speech. Cynical people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. You might have read The Little Prince, a short novel about how a child's mind differs from the adult mind. The author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, does a great job of illustrating how a child's attitude towards money differs from the adult mind. Grown-ups like numbers. One of the themes teaches us not to be too fond of numbers. If a child tells a grown-up, "I saw a beautiful house with red bricks and geraniums at the windows and doves at the roof," they won't be able to imagine such house. You have to tell them, "I saw a house worth 1,000 francs. Then they'll exclaim, "What a pretty house." We are trained from a young age to draw conclusions on certain things based on the associated numbers. Even when we're talking about individuals. How many brothers does he have? How many cars does he own? How many figures does his father make? But you're not likely to hear a child pose these questions. If I were to ask you to think of a house which holds most value to your heart, chances are you will tell me about the place in which you made the most memories, or the place you consider home, where you grew up, or simply where you loved your bedroom the most, not necessarily the house with the biggest price tag. When I heard this passage, it resounded with a personal memory. My grandfather sells paintings for a living. Many are hung up in his house. One summer, when I was about 9 or 10, I asked him to show me the paintings. I wanted to know which ones he thought were beautiful, hidden messages, the meaning behind them, but instead he just proceeded and told me the price of each. 5,000, 10,000. Oh, this one's really valuable, 20,000. But I was 9, and quite frankly, I didn't care about the cost of them. But I realized soon enough, I will be the one associating a good painting with the price of it. If someone were to look at the brain of a newborn coming from a rich family and the brain of a newborn coming from a poor family, there wouldn't be a difference between them. However, as a child grows up and starts to understand more about money, influences such as family, income, environment, and lifestyle start to change the attitude of a child. Most are taught to associate money with happiness and success, and though I'm not denying there are some positive correlations between happiness and income, I don't believe it should be the way. We were given nature, emotions, time, health, all things that don't really cost anything. We were gifted with a circle of life, allowing us to survive. And now, of course, we do need money to survive and to provide ourselves with our basic needs and run a system where work is paid off. But remember that money is natural. It's man-made and wasn't always there. Of course, money allows us to get opportunities such as traveling experiences, education. I mean, just thinking of where I'm standing right now. I'm privileged to have this, and I'm definitely not complaining. But as much as money can be great and provide us with choices, we mustn't forget the ugly and unfair side of it. There are children working hours on ends in dangerous conditions who come home with just a few cents in their pockets, while there are some celebrities who get paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for certain jobs such as attending an event or speaking to an interviewer for 15 minutes. The system will never be fair, but I believe a good way of leading society in the right direction is starting with our youth, teaching them to differentiate experiences, nature, relationships, and etc. with money. Secondly, teaching our wealthier children about empathy, generosity, and raising awareness on other kids who aren't as fortunate as them. But Also letting them know that this doesn't make them any different from them just because of their family income. Let's stop glamorizing money and pressuring children into a work-driven life so fast, but rather remind them to live and enjoy the moment that they're in. There is just a short string of years where money invades a child's mind as plans need to be laid out for future stability. And this is a major contributing factor to why we grow up so fast. In elementary school, a child may collect coins. In middle school, we learn to manage our pocket money. In high school, some of us get jobs. And by the age of 18, we need a good job and a good plan, as our income will determine everything. Or at least that's what our families and mentors tell us. Nearly 60% of all adults in America have admitted living to paycheck, and according to the American Psychological Association, money is the leading cause of stress in the US, starting from the age of 18. So, are you living to work or working to live? So to you fellow children and adults, my message here today is just to remind you to remember the emotional value of things, not only the cost. Remember, it's sometimes important to think like a child, and knowing the incredible value of our natural world, because the most beautiful things in life are natural, and those are the things we are exposed to when we are born. Thank you.
So very much for watching this year's TED event. Our theme, the Japanese term Ikigai, meaning a reason for being, was certainly a major through line and theme to our speeches today, discussing in depth a variety of topics, be it racial discrimination, GMOs, or even the power of money. All of our speakers presented insightful and thoughtful speeches presenting reflections on the past, present, and the bright potential of the future. Of course, Dia, Evie, and I would like to heartily thank the wonderful Miss Judy Priest for her immense aid in videotaping our speeches and also crafting our beautiful cover posters. We would also like to extend a thanks to Miss Sesha, who has been a partner of this club for years and has worked diligently beside us to allow this event to take on a virtual, accessible format. And finally, we would like to extend a hearty thank you to Miss Caroline Tan, not only a wonderful teacher, but also an excellent supervisor and mentor in delivering feedback, insights, and guidance for our speakers. This event would not have been a possibility without these three wonderful people, and of course, our own speakers, who have worked tirelessly to craft and practice the best speeches possible with their expertise. Thank you very much for attending our event, TED Ed 2021, and have a good night. Thank you.